Yet, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Very pleased to be here with Robin Neswood et City, who's joining us today from the White Collar Crime Unit in the Office of the Prosecutor. She Ethel Branchin She Bipatwitni Nishle Nakai Bashichin Sitnijini Dashiche Ado Nakai Dashanala East Canyon Ditnasha and Kintanake Hashche She Deneba Washington Bit Agatit Aitso. It's an honor to be the nation's 13th Attorney General. And I previously served as the nation's 11th Attorney General as well. And one of the most important things that I was able to do during that time was pass a number of amendments to the White Collar Crimes Act, or provisions in the criminal code. And so Robin is now implementing that and actually has some great ideas on improvements, even beyond what we were able to achieve previously. So, making sure that we protect the nation's assets is one of the most important aspects of my job. And of course, protecting the nation from corruption and theft of assets go hand in hand. So, as part of that, we have re-implemented what we're calling the Anti-Corruption Task Force. Previously, we had that rolled out as the Public Integrity Task Force. And so that entity meets on a monthly basis, and we talk about ways to better protect the nation from white-collar crime and corruption. Robin has a very active role in those meetings, and we're so thankful to have Robin in this role and the leadership she brings to the white-collar crime unit, the way she thinks about her work and always thinking about how to make the system work better and more effectively. So we're excited to have Robin here today to share with us the work that she's doing, and how she is implementing her measures to strengthen the nation's response to white collar crime and corruption. So, Robin, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Madam Attorney General Branch. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. It makes me feel so proud to work for the Navajo Nation, and just reminds me why I came back home. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Robin Neswood et City. My clans are Tabaha, and born for Tatchitni and Do Tore Chitni Dashache, Sinjakina Dashanella. And my family, I have a big family here on the reservation. So my Nellas are from St. Michael's, Greasewood, Crystal area. And then my mom's side is from Vanderwagen and Shanto. So I'm very much a people person and a family person. So I probably have lots of relatives out there, by clan and by blood, rooting me on. And I appreciate all of the support that I get from all of you. So I was asked to talk today about my, my leadership within the white collar crime unit. I recently came to the Office of the Prosecutor probably about 6 months ago, and I came from the judicial branch. I had worked for the judicial branch for about 10 years under various judges. I clerked for the different judges. So I have a good grasp and a good idea about how these criminal cases or any type of court cases are processed through the Navajo criminal justice system. So I have that under my belt. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start my presentation. There we go. So Navajo Nation Office of the Prosecutor White Collar Crime Unit, basic introduction. And I want to talk a little bit, just really quickly, about how the White Collar Crime Unit became about. So the White Collar Crime Unit is a special investigative team established at 2NNC 1985. Back in 1980, well, let me go to the next slide. So back in September 22, 1983, a team that is, so the special investigative team that was established is the White Collar Crime Unit. So the intent of the team was to specialize in the areas of white collar or public integrity criminal violations. And the team was supposed to be organized to seek Navajo Nation prosecutions and recovery of misused Navajo Nation funds, equipment, and property. Since 1983, the program, the White Collar Crime Unit here on the Navajo Nation, has evolved and expanded to today. If you look at our pamphlet and our media that goes out, now we like to categorize the work that we do here as apply the laws of the Navajo Nation and maintain accountability of these laws within our government, communities, and amongst our people. So before we get in, I know that there's a chat feature on this. So I'm a one-man team over here today. So I will probably not be looking at the chat or answering questions until the end. Okay, so just so you know, I will try to go through this presentation as quickly as I can. Then we'll get to the questions, just so you don't think I'm ignoring you. So what is white collar crime? I remember I really didn't know much about white collar crime. I heard that my supervisor was once Judge Geraldine Benally, and she said, "Oh, I used to work for the white collar crime unit," and that's the first time I heard of us having a white collar crime unit. But I think a lot of us are familiar with the term just from TV and movies. So I started by looking at what is the origin of white collar crime. So in 1939, a criminologist and sociologist, Edwin Sutherland, first used the term the white collar criminal in a speech he gave to the American Sociological Society and the American Economic Association. Sutherland defined white collar crime as crime committed by a person of respectability and high social status in the course of his occupation. So we go from 1939 to an evolution to today. Well, not today. Let's see, I'm missing a slide here. First, I want to back up a little bit. Let's talk about what crime was like back in 1939. So why the evolution or the origin of white collar crime became about. So back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, the criminal justice system largely just focused on what they term as street crime. So that it took the sociologist Edwin Sutherland to through his research and studies to kind of open the door to other types of crime. So a best way of categorizing it would be sort of like some people like to say violent and nonviolent crime. So that's the major difference between white collar crime and regular street crime. So we get into some more, legalese definitions of what white collar crime is. So we have a term, culpability. That's kind of a strange word to use. So I guess I would describe or define culpability as it's a way for us to conceptualize the actions of a criminal, their wrongdoing, the guiltiness, the illegal actions they've taken, and the factors surrounding their actions. So these four steps or areas, better said, four areas, they apply to any kind of crime, street crime or white collar crime. But I went ahead and just kind of to make it easier for me to maybe flesh this out is to say that I think all four apply to both kinds of crimes, but the 3 and 4, that's when we start moving into more of the factors that I consider when looking at white collar crime. So let's start with the first one. It's extent of someone's knowledge of circumstances surrounding his or her conduct. So I think that's something that prosecutors or attorneys studying crime or judging crime or analyzing crime committed, I think it's important to, we always talk about what was the state of mind of the person when they committed this action. Did they have a full, a high IQ? I mean, some people do have a high IQ, but maybe they have some struggle with some mental illnesses or disability where they're not they don't think as full and clearly as some of us do. Not saying I do, sometimes I have my moments, but that's what that means. The second is the conduct itself and the results. So this is where you get into like the conduct itself and the results. I think you start to separate out what is violent crime and what is nonviolent crime. So even though white collar crime is largely categorized as nonviolent crime, I think it can be violent in some instances. So I hate to just put that as the threshold cutoff line. It's not a bright line rule that says if it's nonviolent, it's automatically white collar crime, but that is a factor to be considered. But like I said, 3 and 4, I think we're getting more into what I consider are huge factors in white collar crime. So number 3, individual's purpose. In white collar crime, an individual's purpose for committing a white collar crime offense is largely motivated by greed. I think that's different from some people that commit crime, like let's say a large amount of the street crime here on the Navajo Nation is usually battery on a family member or public intoxication or DUIs. So on those ones, you can kind of start to see the difference where especially like battery a family member, maybe somebody was intoxicated and while they committed that crime. Whereas a white collar crime offense, they're most likely not intoxicated, but it's motivated by greed. They've been thinking about it. They're like, I need more. So that's when I figure it starts to try to my conceptualization of street crime versus white collar crime starts to make that transition in my mind. So number 4 is reasons for the individual's behavior. So in white collar crime, we look at the reasons for the individual's behavior. Oftentimes it's like they've got away with it once. Oh, I made a mistake on my taxes and I was able to get an extra child tax credit and they didn't catch it. And so you start to, maybe it was a mistake at the first part or you just kind of let it go. But the second time you knew fully well that, you were doing something wrong and you probably are doing it because you got away with it the first time. Or sometimes reasons for the individual's behavior. In a lot of the cases that I see, some people are misusing funds that they have the authority over. So maybe they have authority to get into grandma's bank account, or maybe they have petty cash at their work site and they want to take it and then their plan is to repay it, but they never do and it just gets carried away. Maybe they have a gambling addiction and they're like, I'm just going to go gamble this and I'm going to win and I'm going to pay it back. So in white collar crime, we tend to look at the individual's behavior for taking those actions. So my overall summary, and this is kind of a combination of what I see, what I know, what I learned in the Black's Law Dictionary. So overall, what is white collar crime? It's criminal activity involving cheating or dishonesty in commercial or financial matters, where one's actions are guided by his or her unethical or immoral behavior. Like I said, when somebody's committing a white collar crime, there's that ethics and value, moral code that comes in, like, this is petty cash, this is not my money, but I'm going to go ahead and use it for personal, even if I'm plan to pay it back, or maybe I don't plan to pay it back. There's an ethical decision made at that point where it involves an ethical or a moral upbringing, starts to come back on how you were raised or just what's acceptable in your lifestyle. So let me go to the next slide. Like I said, there was a period. So white collar crime was first coined by Mr. Sutherland back in 1939. Then it started to become, white collar crime becomes more widely known in the 1970s. So the evolution evolves through the US federal government. And I think it's still very prevalent in the US federal government and US federal courts. So at the time, it was considered a social movement, and a term brought about in the 1970s to address corruption at the highest levels of government, think Watergate, and also scandals and bribery schemes involving major American manufacturers. Then white collar crime investigations expanded into corporations, officers in corporations, and major political figures. Later begins white collar crime being associated with criminal organizations, where money laundering and racketeering are the schemes being prosecuted. So the reason why I wanted to start here is because I think that this is what the movies and largely American society promotes as, or knows as, white collar crime. So it's very different here on the Navajo Nation. It's very serious still. I mean, it can cause up to millions and billions of dollars lost. But I think we're more looking at government officials, tribal government officials, not as much large corporations, or especially not as much officers in corporations. Although we do have boards and commissioners here on the Navajo Nation, certain board members that are appointed. We have some that run one of our biggest tribal entities, oil and gas. So that applies, but not on the large scale like it would in large scale America or the federal government. And then on the fourth bullet down, I'm talking about criminal organizations like mafia and so forth. So we don't really have any of those established that I'm aware of and that I've seen here in the Navajo Nation. So that's where it comes from. That's where the federal government, a bulk of their cases is. Oops, let me get to the next slide. More on white collar crime. Okay, so like I said, it involves greed. So greed is usually like an intent to deceive someone, and it's motivated by financial gain. It's usually somebody that, like I said, is there's an element of greed in people that have enough but want more. So that's one of the differences between white collar crime and street crime. The next bullet is the impact of greed can be very devastating. So here on the Navajo Nation, I've seen that firsthand, and it's very sad because especially when you think white collar crime, oftentimes you think money stolen from a big corporation, money stolen from a bank account that's owned by the tribe, or something like a corporation or organization funds, right? But I've seen white collar crime it be very devastating on a personal victim. So sometimes we have people where they're running a small business and they're barely making it. And some of you that know have run your own small business. It's hard. It's hard because you don't know if you're from day to day what you're going to be able to bring home to feed your family and pay your bills with. So when personal victims like that of small businesses or even the elderly, I've seen a lot of financial crimes being committed on the elderly or vulnerable adults. And just when they come in, it's just very heartbreaking to see the devastation of their bank accounts being wiped out or just them being taken advantage of financially. The third one doesn't include physical violence, but causes hurt and pain. The hurt and pain I see is that, these vulnerable people were trusting. They trusted this person to take care of their financial money, or they trusted that they were going to loan somebody money and it was going to be paid back. Or perhaps it's a small business and they were employing somebody. Navajo Nation, I mean, it's hard to find a job here on the Navajo Nation. So I think that small businesses, when they can offer employment, that's a good thing for us all. But some of these small businesses end up getting ripped off by their own employees. So that speaks to the level of trust that is taken advantage of. The next bullet is usually done by someone with a higher social status, respectable, and has authority. We'll get more into that. You'll see throughout my presentation. The next bullet is it's hard to detect when it's done privately or in the course of business. So oftentimes, white collar crime is disguised within routine operations. For example, if you have, like, when it exists within a department of the tribal government, you know how our government is very mundane. It's just like the same thing over and over and over. So sometimes people sort of take advantage of that and fudge the numbers. But because it's done on so many occasions daily, nobody's checking every single time. So that's one way that people get away with white collar crime, is they try to blend it in within the regular routine business that's already occurring, or their responsibilities, or maybe they have authority to take some sort of action. They're helping manage money for one of their elderly family members. And it just kind of gets carried away with, I took out 200, I use it for the lights, but really it was, some of it I used for my own personal fashion, clothing, whatever. So that happens. So it's usually done in disguise within the routine course of business. The next the next bullet is use of technology or manipulation of sophisticated processes. This one, I know I watched a movie a few months ago called Heist 88. And so that was like some teenage African-American kids. They were in charge of doing wire transfers by phone in a bank, and they ended up helping get away, steal, embezzle 80 million worth of wire transfers. That was a good movie, Heist 88, but that's use of technology or manipulation of a sophisticated process. Another type of white collar crime is social media and computer fraud. So I think we've all been victim to this at some level, or maybe sort of targeted for this type of white collar crime that I call it here on the Navajo Nation. And that would be like somebody creates a fake account. Like I think it's probably happened to all of us. You see on Facebook where they say, "Hey, Robin, did you get another account? Somebody, you're asking for money." So sometimes I know that one of my friends had sent me a message asking for money, and I didn't even believe it was real. So you don't even know me. I just, to be on the safe side, I just didn't send it at all. I'm like, call me directly. I just won't respond to anybody asking for money over the internet or online. The last one is prey on vulnerable adults. So white collar crime criminals, they understand the vulnerability of the lonely and the needy. They take advantage of that through social media, through computer fraud, through predatory lending. They're asking for loans, and they become the targets of white collar crime here on the Navajo Nation. So I kind of dipped in a little bit to what I'm seeing here on the Navajo Nation, but this is supposed to be the slide to really talk about where it is on the Navajo Nation. So the Navajo Nation White Collar Crime Unit. The White Collar Crime Unit exists to investigate and prosecute criminal activity dealing with corruption and illegal transactions occurring on the Navajo Nation. And the second plug is I've already mentioned this in the beginning, but I'll go ahead and re-mention it so we can get on our way started with what's happening here on the Navajo Nation. The purpose of the White Collar Crime Unit is to apply the laws of the Navajo Nation and maintain accountability of these laws within our government, communities, and amongst our people. So I really like this map. This map is hanging in my office, and it tells me, the location. So a lot of our corruption that we are investigating, a lot of my files right now, or our files in the White Collar Crime Unit, have to do with local governments, chapter officials. And so this map is really helpful because it lays out all of the chapters that I'm not very familiar with on the northern end and the very eastern end. And it helps me conceptualize, how far, when they're saying they're going to Window Rock, traveling to Window Rock, and when I need to pick up evidence and which is the most local court to them. So I look at this map almost all the time. Let me go back. So if anybody has access to one of these maps, they're hard to get. They're like $60, $70. One of your departments wants to donate another one to me, I'd be happy to accept that. On behalf of the White Collar Crime Unit. So the typical white collar crime case, like I said, white collar crime is very different from street crime. The type of individual that commits a white collar offense is usually someone that did not just wake up one day and decide to commit a crime. The actions of white collar criminals are planned and well organized, may be unintentionally completed previously. Like I said, it may have been a mistake on the taxes that they got away with, or a fudge in maybe one of their travel reimbursements. They claimed a lunch that they didn't actually take, or something to that extent. Or maybe intentions were good in the beginning, but greed becomes involved and a motivation for financial gain takes over. White collar crime is very closely tied to one's moral and ethical values. That keeps coming up over and over about one's moral and ethical values. And I think I'll just say that this is why I feel like this work is for me, because in the beginning, I never thought I would be a prosecutor. I thought, oh gosh, I can't judge people. I don't know their personal situations, or maybe they have health conditions that require them to commit this crime, or diseases, or alcoholism problems, and I just didn't know. So when the white collar crime became an option for me, I think this is the underlying reason why I felt like I could do it, because I think that people do have make a wrong and a right path when it becomes ethical and moral decisions and values. Next slide is white collar crime offenders. So who are these white collar crime offenders? So I kind of just laid out some commonalities or characteristics, if you will, that I found maybe through my research and just through knowledge of how it works in my short time here, my 6 months. So this is what I've seen. So they're usually educated, occupy professional positions like attorneys, or maybe they're the head of a procurement department within the Navajo Nation, and they can sway procurement. Procurement's a very complicated process that can be easily manipulated if you know the system well. And somebody who would occupy a professional position to be in that position to maneuver through the procurement process would likely be not a criminal offender, but they could. So they have access to this type of situation. So also attorneys, I don't know if I just said attorneys, but they're another one. Private attorneys, you know, they take a lot of money up front. Sometimes they'll ask for a retainer fee, and sometimes I know that we don't know what happens with that, or we're not sure if a correct calculation is being done. And so attorneys can get themselves, private attorneys can get themselves caught up in white collar crimes. I'm sure other professions as well, but just because I'm an attorney, I'm more familiar with the problems that they face. The third one, occupy elected positions. Now, I think we all can have an idea of what this means. Back in, gosh, maybe I say 2014, when they had all of those Navajo Nation Council delegates, they were all being charged by the Navajo Nation Special Prosecutor with the quid pro quo criminal acts. So that was a large example across the board of how occupation of elected position can get you caught up in a white collar crime offense. Have authority in their positions. So a lot of our cases that come from the government level, somebody has an authority to use their P card and they're abusing it. Use their WEX card, they're abusing it. They're filling up their own personal vehicle with their WEX card, which is, if you don't know, a WEX card is the government fuel card that we all have access to, it, a PIN number. So if we're away from the Navajo Nation fueling stations, we can go in Albuquerque or Phoenix, and we can use the WEX card to fill up our tribal vehicles, but some people use it to fill up their personal vehicles. So they have the authority in their positions to manage government funds or property. Next, they know there are two paths, a right and a wrong. Like I said, I sort of touched on this earlier. They know there's a right and a wrong. There's a path in, it's very different from like battery, where that's just something that happens. I mean, I'm not saying they don't know it's wrong, but I think there's a different process to getting to the actions where it's more thought out and there's actually some time to respond to the correct path or the illegal path. Tend to justify their cheating. So white collar crime offenders tend to do that in some cases. Like, for example, I stole because it's a small business and they weren't paying me enough, and they really get all this money because of me. I brought in all these customers, so I deserve to have a piece of it. Or maybe my salary is really low, and when, if I would have done the same work in Albuquerque, I would have got $10 more an hour. So those sort of situations are examples of situations where people tend to justify their cheating. And it starts with an ethical decision. And I put this in here because I think and I've never really considered this before as much as I do now, but it's very important for all of us when we start a new job, for those of us that hire employees, those of us that accept the new elected position. It's very important to, we all think, it always comes up like, did you sign that you got a copy of the personnel policy? Yes, but there's also usually going to be a ethics code to regulate conduct. So in larger professions like medical, doctors, or attorneys, accountants, they probably have their own set of rules of ethics. But for the regular, like legal secretary or maybe procurement officer, you really want to make sure that you have a good set of ethical code rules and policies available for the employees, because that's where you set the guidelines on what is acceptable and what is not. So here in the White Collar Crime Unit in Window Rock, we're located right across from Taco Bell. It's a team of 4, the fabulous 4. So I was selected to be the prosecuting attorney. And just a little bit about myself. I got my law degree, my JD, from the University of Arizona, and then I passed the New Mexico State and Navajo Nation bar. So I'm licensed to practice law both on the Navajo Nation and New Mexico State. I'm supervised by the chief prosecutor, Vernon Jackson. I have, like I said, judicial branch experience, and I'm largely responsible for reviewing evidence, witness statements, drafting complaints, prosecuting cases in the various district courts, and I have the authority to sign criminal complaints, issue subpoenas, offer plea bargains, and recommend penalties for the crimes committed. Under me, I have a senior legal secretary, and all of the people that work here in the White Collar Crime Unit are wonderful. So I'm really big on finding their expertise and their special qualities and twisting them around to work for how we need them to operate well so we can get business done here in the White Collar Crime Unit. So while these people I'm introducing may have a wealth of experience, I'm kind of just pinpointing, the main things that we pride ourselves on here in this unit. So our senior legal secretary began her career in the legal field with the state of Arizona, and she manages the official case files, prepares inquiries, processes intakes, handles court filings, and performs various administrative duties. So she's on our front line. When people want to make reports of white collar crime, they contact her, and we'll have her contact information at the end. Okay, let's go to the next one. And like I said, I see ask a question, but I want to just get through these slides and then we'll get to the questions. Okay, and I think I have about 30 minutes left, so we should be right on schedule. All right, so I have 2 investigators. When I was hired here, we were all pretty much hired at the same time in the fall of 2023. So we all started at the same time, which is really good because none of us were all kind of learning, pushing it together. But the first white collar crime investigator, she and it's all female. We're all female crew, all female Navajo crew. She's an Air Force veteran. She has an associate's in criminal justice. She's nearing her bachelor's in IT. So I think she said she has like 4 more credits to go, something very small. So we're encouraging her to get on that. She has former experience with Tribal Department of Corrections, security operations, including armored vehicle transport. She has a lot of security background information, which is very helpful with her IT, combined with her IT. So what she does is she collects, analyzes, secures evidence, interviews witnesses, prepares data and information for prosecutions, collaborates with state, federal, and local law enforcement agencies to advance investigations and other duties as required to solve crimes and assist me in the prosecutions, this office and the prosecutions that we have. The second investigator, it's really kind of neat and fortunate that our investigators don't have the exact same experience. They come from different backgrounds, which is very helpful in the work we do here. So this particular investigator has her bachelor's in criminal justice, and she's nearing her completion of a master's of science in psychology, forensic studies, and she's set to receive her master's in November of 2024. So we're cheering her on, and we're excited for her to bring back that education with us. So her personalized experience is very helpful because she was a former chapter service coordinator. So in chapter governments, I won't go too far into this, there's certified and non-certified chapters. So this is the same position, the chapter service coordinator or the chapter manager. Just depends if you're working for a certified chapter or a non-certified chapter. So she's worked for 2 different chapter governments. She has a wealth of expertise in chapter organization, the personnel structure, programs, fund accounts, budgets using the MIP and WIN systems, and familiarity with the activities and involvement of the community. So as maybe some of you can imagine, a bulk of our cases come from reports that there's being misuse or abuse at the chapter level. So investigator 2 she has a lot of knowledge about how the funds, the accounting, the procedures work within the chapters. So I rely on her to prepare a lot of the data and give me a lot of insight about what's the right thing and what's the wrong thing that's happening within the chapters when we get those types of cases. So I did say that we were 100% female staff, but we're also 100% Navajo staff. And I consider this very, 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 very meaningful here. And I'm going to tell you why. It's nothing to do with prejudice. It's actually helpful to the work that we do. It is very important that the white collar crime unit staff is entirely Navajo. And this is because white collar crime largely surrounds ethical and moral motivations. It is important and helpful to have a well-rounded understanding of the culture, the economy, tribal government, and environment of the Navajo Nation. So the uniqueness that we're able to give to the white collar crime unit because we're Navajo consists of consultation one-on-one with suspects, defendants, victims, and witnesses, and we're able to I guess build a camaraderie and a mutual trust because we're Navajo. So we can talk one-on-one, Shema, Shanela, Shajeh, those types of things we can say and build that trust, and it enhances our communication. And it's very comfortable in doing so because we share the same Navajo culture and traditions with these people that we're consulting with one-on-one. We have access to Navajo language interpreters. We were all raised here on the Navajo Nation, so we know the geographic area well. We relate to others to so sometimes, we have to go out there. I think last month, I was out there way somewhere by Bidahochi, by Dilcon. I mean, we were on dirt roads talking to men about their sheep. And so even though, some of my family's from Greasewood and I kind of know the area, I don't really know the back roads, but it's not going to be a strange thing to me when they say, go past this light post, past the tree, turn left, you see an outhouse, that kind of thing. I'm not shocked, or I'm just like, okay, I get it. I can visualize where I'm going. So that's good. That's helpful. We have empathy for our own people. We know how to incorporate elements of mediation and peacemaking. So here, I consider myself a very traditional person, and I like to, I'm not just for a criminal justice retribution. I very much believe in mediation, peacemaking, resolution at the end. I don't think that just severe penalties of incarceration is the be all end all. I'd like relationships to be repaired. I think that we will all continue to live here with our relatives and for generations ahead, and us not finding resolutions can negatively impact our future generations and our grandchildren. So I always try to keep that in mind and try to make sure that I'm talking to people one-on-one. I'm listening to what they say, and I'm trying to work with them while considering the victims. And I'm trying to, oftentimes in Navajo, you talk with the victims and they're like, okay, this is all I want. I don't want him to go to jail, but I just want my money back. And we're able to facilitate those kinds of, I guess, arrangements. Let's see here. I think I just want to give a shout out to when I first came back to Navajo Nation. I was supervised by the late Judge Carol Perry, and she really taught me a lot. And I remember she was very different in her, I guess, the way she held her criminal bench trials, criminal arraignments. And I remember sometimes, like, some judges will be like, okay, the bail, $500, $300, we can charge half of what the fine would be, so up to $700. And so Judge Perry would always say, sometimes she would only make the bail $10. And so we would say, why? And so she would ask them, how much can you afford to pay? And so she was like, well, I think that it's important to consider that everybody doesn't have a lot of money, and we don't have a bail bondsman system here. And if I make it $200, it's going to be Grandma or Masana that's going to pay it. And that's not the point here. We want to have the person pay their own fines. It's not Masana's fault. So I learned with those kinds of teachings, I learned how to kind of not just consider the crime and the statute, but as well how it affects everybody around the situation, surrounding the situation, and how everybody's affected by one person's actions. We understand the family dynamics and living situations, so I kind of went into that. And I'm trying to go fast. I think I'm 20 minutes. Okay, I knew I was gonna run out of time, but I'm trying to talk fast. So I'm not gonna go into all of these areas of focus. You guys want to talk more about it, come see me. I can talk all day about these things, but you know, our areas of focus are the major ones are fraud, theft, embezzlement, bribery, extortion, abuse of government position, conspiracies, mismanagement of government funding, insurance scams, internet crimes, and money wiring schemes. So I'm going to pass that slide and go right into the Navajo Nation Ethics in Government Law, Navajo Nation Code, Title II. Okay, so there's different forums for adjudicating illegal activity. You can have an administrative system that is able to provide remedies, or in remedies meaning like punishment in the form of fines or restitution, or you can have it all the way scaled all the way to the other end where it's criminal. So the burdens of proof are different. So like, for example, in an administrative law forum, let's take this Department of Ethics and Rules. So I think a lot of us know who they are, and a lot of our cases go through them first, and they have an administrative authority to, once they win their case in the Office of Hearing Appeals, because that's who adjudicates their complaints. And then they have a section of sanctions. So it's usually, like I said, restitution or penal fines. Maybe you're not allowed to run for office for another 5 years. So those type of remedies, not jail time. So everything except for jail time and probation. And their statute of limitation on those type of administrative civil violations is 4 years, and that's at 2 NNC 3769. Now, Navajo Nation Code Title II, the best way I can categorize it, and I think this is even the title of the whole section, it's standards of conduct and restricted activities of public officials and employees. So recall that I was saying that in businesses and in our government tribal departments, it's always good to know and have a good standard, solid rules of professional conduct that talks about no conflicts of interest, don't do this, don't do that, nepotism. So there's the rules, right, and the acceptable policies, but there's also the law. So when we talk about Navajo Nation Code Title II, that's the law. So we have nepotism, accepting gifts. So it regulates the conduct in these areas for a majority of it. So, I mean, there's other stuff, but this is just the main topics would be like anti-nepotism, accepting gifts, conflicts of interest, failure to take official actions, misuse or abuse of one's authority. At the end of Title II, at the end of the ethics and government part, there's a, let's see, I can't see my slide. 2 NNC 3781. So sometimes here in the Office of the Prosecutor, we do draft complaints charging people with some of those government ethics violations. And when we do that, we also cite 2 NNC 3781 because we have a higher standard of proof here beyond a reasonable doubt. And when we reach that and we win that, we meet our burden in court, we are able to recommend criminal penalties, which would be like jail time, in addition to what the administrative penalties would be, civil penalties. So that's something that's it's always been there. I think they use that. I first saw it being used. I mean, I'm sure they used it before this, but my first experience with it was when they did the like I said, the council delegate cases with the quid pro quo, and we had a special prosecutor. I don't know if those started with the Department of Ethics and Rules, but once it got to the Office of the Prosecutor, some of the council delegates end up doing jail time under this code. So it works and it is effective. Now, next we have the criminal code. So this is largely what we do in this office, everybody, the Navajo Nation criminal code. So I wanted to not spend too much time, but I wanted to touch on something that I've seen as a problem in this office. Not a, well, it's more of an obstacle in the work that I do. Some of these statutes, as we're evolving, we need to kind of expand. So, for example, maybe way back when they didn't really anticipate a lot of social media crime, fraud, and those types of things. So the law needs to evolve with the times. And one of the recommendations I'm making is that, and I've made several already, but in addition to that, I think that we need to consider who are the victims of these white collar crime offenses. I think for the most part, the Navajo Nation, when they were creating the code on white collar crime, they were thinking, and rightfully so, that the main victim would be the Navajo Nation, right? But like I said, there's also victims. There's elderly victims. There's vulnerable adult victims. There's private businesses that are being taken advantage of. So there's all these other categories that I'm seeing that are victims. So we're trying to I'm trying to make recommendations with the chief prosecutor, trying to get that expanded to mean we're not just going to call victims the Navajo Nation. There's all kinds of victims, and people are, it's just sad to say, well, you're not defined as the Navajo Nation, so the code of embezzlement or the statute of embezzlement, you're not protected under that. So I'm trying to find ways to expand the victims that we're able to protect. So one of the ways I'm doing that is, so Navajo Nation 1 through 14 starts with Navajo Nation Council, speaker delegates. I mean, all the positions that you would know is obvious is Navajo Nation. But number 15 is sort of like I have to be creative with that one. And it says any other entity that receives funding meant to benefit the Navajo Nation or Navajo people, including but not limited to Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act 638 funds, NAHASA, that's Native American Housing, I can't remember the rest, I'm sorry, nervous, funds from private sources, and any other federal, state, or Navajo Nation funds. So we've had cases where, for example, I think there was a pharmacist, maybe some crazy business going on in the IHS pharmacy with a theft or maybe a white collar crime violation. And so I had to be careful, and they're not technically the Navajo Nation, but luckily I was able to maneuver the I guess the complaint to say they fit within the definition of Navajo Nation. So that's there, but if you have any influence or any weight out there or any decision-making power in helping us expand the code so that we're able to protect a wider range of victims, especially the elderly, I ask you respectfully to go along with those proposed amendments. Okay, where am I on time? Oh gosh, okay. I'll go faster. Title 17 convictions. So I won't go into a lot of this. It's just, my job. I prosecute crime. The investigators prepare it. We talk about it. I look at the criminal code. I make sure that the elements, we have the proper evidence and the facts that can tie into the statutory language, and I draft the complaints. And sometimes I do consult with my supervisor, who's the chief prosecutor, but oftentimes, because like I said, I'm new to this prosecution business, almost always, and I think always from day one that I've been here, I'm always consulting with another prosecutor or the chief prosecutor when it comes to recommending a jail sentence, because I want to make sure that I'm not being biased or that I'm not forgetting some other factors that I may be considering. So that's what my personal day looks like when I'm trying to recommend penalties. Okay, caseload. So when we got here, I want to leave at least 8 minutes for questions. So let me go a little faster. When I got here, there was probably 300 plus cases. And so I just want to put the word out there that, you know, we are doing careful evaluations, and it's not easy because, well, one example is there's all of these people involved, right? And sometimes when white collar crime happens, like let's take a travel reimbursement, like a TA, someone does a TA, they turn it in, they do their travel expense report, and then it gets signed off and processed. Let's say that this person, the traveler, is doing something that's illegal, fudging their numbers or something. Maybe they're adding mileage and they actually took the Tri-B or whatever. And so there's always sometimes, usually there's somebody that knows about it, because there's the person that's processing it, there's a person that's authorizing it. So we have to, when we're reviewing all these cases, we don't just look at the offender, we look at everybody that's involved and that could have known. Because if you know about this illegal activity, we're going to charge you too as a conspirator or an accomplice. So that takes a lot of time to try to consider what other people knew and who else was involved, because we want to be fair in our charging of what was going on. We do careful consideration of existing policy, laws, rules, and practices. As you know, the code is evolving, laws change. As these chapter governments are becoming certified, people are they're introducing new policies. So we have to make sure that at the time in 2013, when this was an issue, what was the policy in place at that time? So, and as we know in Navajo Nation, these aren't easy things to get a hold of. They're not published online. There's not a library of all of these things. So that takes some time to review. We have an evidence locker here in my office and then in other parts of the building. So we have a bunch of evidence. I have to make sure that there's a proper chain of custody. How did we get it? Where has it been? Has anyone checked it out? So we got to make sure that that's all there, because those are things that can be challenged in a criminal case. I have to do careful review of the criminal statutory language to make sure I meet each element. I don't want to spend all of this time on a case and then just to get to court and the judge says, well, you know, what about this part? We also organize criminal cases to ensure there's enough for a successful prosecution, because not all cases can go make it all the way. So we have to strategize with that. We're planning to send out a public service announcement, but I want to talk briefly about protecting your loved ones. So it's very important for you guys to talk with your elders, your parents, your vulnerable adults in your family about securing their personal information. Have them go to DNA and maybe do a power of attorney or some type of plan that they could use in the event that they get sick or they become very ill, terminally ill, or that they even pass away, and make sure that it's clear about what the responsibility of the person, the agent who's in charge, is supposed to do, what they want. A lot of times it's happening at the last minute when the person is in the hospital and it's the doctor that hands them, okay, who can come and sign your directives. And so try to talk with your loved ones and plan that out ahead of time. It's very important to limit sharing of information online. Don't put all your information on social media. Be careful when you're co-signing for loans or property. I know that in our Navajo culture, it's within our traditions to help each other, but I strongly recommend that you sort of pump the brakes on that when it comes to social media relationships. People will actually prey and target on lonely and vulnerable people. We've seen an uptick in people cashing checks. So when you cash a check, those of us that have had the we're fortunate enough to get a check where they've held it for 7 or 10 days. Maybe they'll release half the funds in 4 days. Don't use those funds until the final day of releasing it all. Don't use it, even if they put half of it in, because oftentimes these checks maybe won't go all the way through, or the bank finds a problem with it, and then you're stuck with all of this money that you took out and you have to pay it back, or maybe you bounced, and just gets you into a huge mess. So if you can, please just wait the 10 days that the bank requires to get the full deposit in before you start spending it or withdrawing it. Like everybody kind of knows this one, online money transactions through Zelle, Cash App, PayPal, gift cards. Some people online are asking them to send gift cards. Don't do that. If you are going to hire somebody to take care of your loved ones, do background checks on them if you can, and be careful with your online purchases when you put your credit card and money information out there. I'm going to go ahead and skip this slide because I think that my goals will become evident as I move along here. But I want to talk to you a little bit about those of you that are professionals out there. It can be scary as a professional, especially here on the Navajo Nation. We're oftentimes asked to use our education and experience to make important decisions. So all the time, I get worried about what is, am I making the right decision? So if possible, always seek out a second opinion. That way they can maybe pull out some ideas that maybe as a sounding board, you weren't thinking about this, and they can raise different issues. So I always try to do that when possible. And I always try to talk to more than one person. Never knowingly sign, authorize, send, or create a false document. I mean, sometimes we're tempted to do that, or maybe we're not tempted to do that, but we think, oh, it's just a formality and I'm just going to go ahead and backdate it or whatever. Don't do that. Before making important decisions, ask yourself, is this something I can live with later on? I mean, if you're going to change a date, I mean, is it really like the end all be all? Like, just put the right date in and live with it. Because something devastating could happen if you try to backdate or try to change a number or something like that. But when you do accidentally do this stuff, never compound or bury your mistakes. Be honest and come forward and say this was a mistake. Just don't take advantage of that mistake going through and try to protect yourself. The best way to protect yourself is to be honest and bring it forward, not to cover it up. Do not follow directions from others you believe to be improper or unethical. It's okay to ask questions. If my boss told me to do something questionable, I'm going to ask him questions about it first, and I probably wouldn't do it, or I'd probably have him put it in writing. And lead by example. That's really hard to do. Sometimes I'm a fast talker and I make split decisions in a split second, and I need to kind of go and lead by example, because greed can destroy you. Lastly, I want to just acknowledge Hank Shea, assistant U.S. attorney that prosecuted, probably thousands of white-collar crime cases within the federal district courts. So I got a lot of this information from him, and he ends with act with integrity, exhibit courage, honor your reputation. So I have 3 minutes for questions, and I'm not sure how we're going to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and leave this slide up, okay? Because this is where you can make case reports, comments, concerns. All right, let's see. And if you're going to be mean to me, I'm not going to answer your question. Let's see.
So Robin, I can help you with the questions. I've
Okay.
perused them, and so I have a sense for what they
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. No worries. Thank you so much for that very informative presentations. Really
Fast. Thank
appreciate
you.
that. Yeah. And probably a lot of them were just comments and not so much questions, or they weren't directly related to the topic. But one of the questions was how often the ethics rules get updated and the white-collar crime laws as well.
The ethics, you mean in Title II, do you think? I'm sorry, I don't follow that question.
Well, the ethics rules are really not in Title II, right? So,
the rules.
And
Okay.
I don't think those have been updated since like the 80s, but.
You mean for the Navajo Nation?
Yeah.
Yes. So I have no idea. Like I said before I got here, people pay so little attention to that. But now that I'm in this business, I'm like, that's the first thing I go to every time. So I think that that's a good point, and I will take a look at that, because I need to start making recommendations as far as I just want people to know the options, be educated and informed about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So I apologize that I don't know the answer to that, but it is a very important question to point out.
I mean, so for the rules themselves, I mean, it's been quite a while. I believe it's 1984 when they were last updated, and they were just an initial issuance, actually. And so technically they've never been updated. So there is a need for that, certainly. And then additionally, the white-collar crime laws, it has been quite some time since those have been updated. I think it was like 1990 when they were last updated, when we made those amendments in 20, I think it was 20.
There was some made in 2017, and that was,
yeah.
I think, mostly to the statute of limitations.
Yeah, it was. And the reason why we made that change is because we were encountering situations where there was large thefts of money or assets, and we were looking to the feds to prosecute those claims, but they weren't always doing that. And their statute of limitation ended the same time as our statute of limitation. So, if they were holding on to a case, and white collar crime cases tend to be document intensive. So the investigation is more cumbersome, requires more time, and more attention to detail than other types of crimes. So, it just, oftentimes we would have these cases running up against their statute of limitations. All of the evidence would be with the federal prosecutors. And then if they didn't prosecute and they handed material off to our teams, we didn't have the time we needed to sort through the material and build a tribal prosecution. And so that necessitated having longer statutes of limitations. And so we changed that.
Totally agree.
I think it was like 3 years to 10 years. So, and Robin has shared with you some of the things that she's observed in her work where there are needed updates to the white collar crime provisions in the criminal code. And there is currently an effort underway to update the criminal code. And so I'm hoping that those edits make their way into that round of revisions. And Robin, I think you've shared that with the chief prosecutor, your suggestions. So
I'm hoping that we can get it done in the summer session. Fingers crossed.
I think everybody hopes for that. So hopefully that is the case, or at least those of us who are trying to enforce the law is hoping for that. There are, delays that continue to happen, but hopefully one of the challenges is that, the public defender's office is not staffed as well as it should be. And so that we want to make sure that we're advancing a proposal that has buy-in from all parties, at least at this phase of revisions. So that's a challenge, but it is something that we are looking at and working on actively. So hopefully we'll see some revisions, at least to the criminal code. That does not address the ethics rules. So that's something that would have to be done separately. But that is absolutely also on our radar and something that we're talking about in the anti-corruption task force. So hopefully we can see that happen here in the next couple of years as well, while we're under this administration. So,
put it on our agenda.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you so much for your presentation, Robin.
Yes. I wish I had more time, but
yes. And there were a number of comments asking if this could be shared in the Navajo language. So maybe that's something we could talk about, is having a presentation of similar content in Denebazad. So let's connect about that offline. But thank you so much for your presentation today, Robin.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and being patient with me. If you have any questions, you have our information and you can call me.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Bonnet.